Job for today, get underneath the skin of that car, the new Porsche 911. Now, before the end of this video, I want to have answered two questions. Number one, does the 911 still feel like a 911? With every new generation, it gets just a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier. There are new technologies. It perhaps becomes a bit more of a GT car and less of a sports car. Question two, now that the Carrera S, the car we have here, costs £93,000, or with options, more than £100,000, which to me is supercar money, wouldn't you just rather have a supercar?
The first thing to do is have a proper snoop around this new 911. The new rear light bar is the biggest point of difference. It's slim and sharp and looks very sci-fi. If you haven't loved the styling of 911s before, this new model isn't going to change your mind. I think it looks good, although once you've seen the two full-width black plastic sections front and rear, you cannot unsee them. This car is wider than before by 44mm across the rear axle and 45mm across the front. The wheels are staggered in terms of size. The fronts are 20 inches in diameter, the rear's now 21. This test car has the optional Porsche Active Suspension Management System, which lowers the ride height by 10mm. It costs £665. The optional sports exhaust is £1,844.
There's plenty to discuss within the cabin as well. Now, some of it feels very familiar from the previous car, the 991, such as the shape of the top of the dashboard, the armrest here, the shape and the look of the seats. But then a lot of it is new as well, such as the touch screen here, the infotainment system, which is all pretty easy to navigate. Then we've got the dials in front, a big central rev counter with this sort of 3D design, which is very typical 911. That looks great. And then it's flanked by two big screens that you can fiddle with to get all the information that you want to see. Lovely row of buttons here with a nice knurled finish, suspension, the damper switch, the traction control, hazard warning lights and all the rest of it. A very stubby little gear shift lever. It's a strange thing that. It looks a bit odd, but actually I think it works just fine. This black plastic stuff, it looks shiny. It will look great in a showroom when it's not got any smudge marks or any dust on it, but after a few days it just starts to look a little bit mucky. Some of these buttons I'm not sure about. The window switches, they've got a strange spongy action. It's not a nice crisp clicky action. We're getting into the details now, aren't we? What really matters though, what's really important in here is the seating position. I bang on about seating positions because I think it's really important in a performance car. This one is spot on. I feel like I'm sat on the deck. I'm so low. If I was any lower, I wouldn't be able to see over the dashboard itself. Steering wheel comes all the way out to meet me. Yeah, it's spot on. Legs outstretched. Great visibility all around. That's the typical 911 thing. And this new version absolutely nails that. However, there's one thing about this cabin that I'm not at all keen on. It's this section around the gear lever here. You have a sort of floating island with a sunken bit underneath it. Fine when the car's brand new. But I'm certain that within a few months, that's going to become full of filth, bits of sandwich and hair and fluff and all sorts. And I don't think you'll be able to get a cloth or a vacuum cleaner in there to clear it out properly. Maybe that's just me. Anyway, generally, the cockpit of the 911, the quality is fantastic. Everything works beautifully. It's a triumph. The way the car looks, the car's cabin, those things matter. But in terms of a 911 feeling like a 911, it's all to do with the way the car drives. That's the most important thing. Now, it is true that this car has grown a little bit compared to the previous 991 generation 911. What we have now is the same wider body shell for four-wheel drive cars and for two-wheel drive cars as well. So that means that the two-wheel drive car is now a little bit wider than it was before. However, when you're driving on a narrow road like this one, it doesn't suddenly feel enormous. It doesn't feel like it's spilling out into the next lane. actually the car still feels quite compact. I feel like I can place it, I feel like I've got options in my lane, and I don't have to stray across the dotted white line to pick a line through corners. And it's also true that the new 992 is heavier than the previous one by about 55 kilograms. It's now 1,515 kilos. So it's become a little bit chubbier, but it's not exactly a massive lump now, is it? Compared to most of its rivals, the 911 is still a relatively light car. With every new generation of 911, the engine edges forward in the body just a little bit. What that means is the weight distribution between the two axles becomes more even if it's only by a tiny, tiny amount. And so what you therefore find is that as the car evolves, it feels less and less rear-engined. You're not managing a huge pendulum out the back. You're not having to really think about the balance of the car on the way into a corner. In fact, you kind of drive it more or less the way you would a mid-engine car. Now, when the previous model, the 991, was new, the steering really was actually a weak point, but as the car developed over 6 or 7 years, it improved enormously, and now in this new 992, although you can tell it's EPAS, electric assistance rather than hydraulic, I think it's really good actually. Consistent, it's accurate, it's intuitive, you can really position the car where you want to, so while the steering wheel doesn't fidget and writhe around in your fingertips the way it used to, the steering overall is still very good, and better actually in this two-wheel drive car than it is in the four-wheel drive car. Now, what is very clever about this car is that even in Sport Plus mode, I can switch the dampers back to a softer setting using the button on the dashboard here. That means that I can use Sport Plus mode even on a relatively bumpy road like this one and combine it with the softer, more fluid, more compliant suspension. And then you start to appreciate how well the chassis is working along this road. The body control is so good, it's supreme actually. Over these yumps and over these crests, the car's just totally locked down. So what do you notice? What do you feel when you start chasing the car through a sequence of bends? What you notice first is that you feel slightly disconnected from the car. It all feels slightly remote. You don't necessarily feel front and center, which is always what 911s did before, made you, the driver, feel like you were front and center of the whole experience, totally absorbed, totally engaged. In this car, you just feel slightly disconnected from it. At least you do, until you really up the pace. When you really start flinging the car about, driving it with some real commitment, that's when it comes to you. That's when you feel totally engrossed. That's when you feel like you're driving a 911 again. It is a shame that the car doesn't wrap you up in all that excitement and all that drama and all that involvement and engagement at lower and medium speeds. But it's probably inevitable, isn't it really, that as the car becomes a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, a little bit more sophisticated, more refined, more usable every day, that sporty character, that sporty edge is eroded just a little bit. The good news is, actually, it is still there. You just have to go and find it. So what about an aspect of the car that we haven't touched upon yet? What about the drivetrain?
The engine is a 3-litre flat 6 with 2 turbochargers, just like before. Power is now up to 444 brake horsepower, torque up to 391 pounds-foot. This two-wheel drive Carrera S sprints to 62 miles an hour in 3.5 seconds and onto 191 miles per hour flat out. The gearbox is an 8-speed PDK dual clutch. The lower-powered 911 Carrera will arrive soon, as will the 7-speed manual transmission.
The truth is that this is a very, very good turbocharged engine. Whether you regret the loss of the normally aspirated engine or not, whatever, I think you have to acknowledge that this turbocharged engine is supremely good. Let me demonstrate how flexible it is to you. So we're in second gear. We're doing about 20 miles an hour, 1800 RPM. I put my foot down and instantly it pulls. It's really strong through the mid-range and then it pulls all the way at the top end to 7,500 RPM with no fade, no loss of energy at the top end. And the throttle response is so impressive as well. Put your foot down and the car pulls straight away. There's no hesitation, no real discernible turbo lag. It's just foot down, bang, away you go. So that gives us an answer to question 1. Does the new 911 still feel like a 911? Yes, it does, but you really have to go searching for it. If you just drive it at medium and low speeds, it can feel a bit remote, a little bit lifeless. When you really get up it, that's when it starts to feel like a 911. Now, what about question number 2? Wouldn't you rather just have a supercar? Boom, put in the R8. How did that happen? This isn't any R8, this is the R8 RWS. So this is a second generation car, pre-facelift. Audi built 999 rear wheel drive Audi R8s globally, so a fraction of that here in the UK. That makes this a very rare car. Now we've chosen the RWS because it's far and away the most enjoyable second generation R8 to drive, getting rid of those front drive shafts, losing 50 kilograms, and making it a simpler car with no dynamic steering, no adaptive dampers and so on, just a mechanical limited slip differential. Taking away all that kit and simplifying has made it a sweeter car, so much more enjoyable to drive over a mountain road. The other reason for choosing the RWS over a new R8 is that you can pick these up for pretty much the same price as a new 911 Carrera S. For £90,000 you can find these cars with only a couple of thousand miles on them. Spend £100,000 and you'll get one with a couple of hundred miles on it. Now, because it's a rare car, I suspect that one day this will become quite sought after in a way that a four-wheel drive R8 or any 911 Carrera S simply won't. Even so, the R8, any R8, is all about its engine really. This car's got the 5.2 litre V10, 533 horsepower, so it's a good chunk more powerful than that 911. And of course, it's all about the soundtrack and the power delivery. That's what it's all about. It's just so sweet. A high revving, normally aspirated engine in this era of turbocharging. This was comfortably one of the top 5, top 6 new performance cars launched last year. So great to drive. The steering could do with a little bit more feel, a cleaner, crisper sense of connection maybe. But otherwise, I just think it's brilliant to drive. It's involving and engaging at all speeds, the way four-wheel drive Audi R8s aren't, and actually in a way that 911 isn't really. Question 2 then, wouldn't you rather just have a supercar? Well, I've driven them both back to back and I have an answer for you. You see, the 911, well, it's a 911, isn't it? Although the Audi, it's got that V10, that amazing V10, and I think for one drive across a mountain road, it's just a little bit more exciting. It's got that sense of theatre, that sense of occasion. Although the one that I really want to own, the one that I want to use every day, and the one that I think you'd get the most satisfaction from overall, well, it's still the 911.
What do you reckon? Was that the right decision? Let us know in the comments. Please remember to subscribe to our channel. We're going to start posting videos just like this one much more regularly. Subscribe now and you won't miss a single one.